As a sequel to Man of Steel, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice first opens with an obligatory flashback sequence of Thomas and Martha Wayne being killed by Joe Chill in front of their son Bruce, which is also synchronized with their funeral. Narration by an older Bruce mentions this to have been a dream to him about how his life fell and has fallen ever since. I'll say what others have said about this opening. Yes, it is another retelling of how Batman's parents died. Yes, we have seen it multiple times before with other versions of Batman. However, as the Superman movie is opening by introducing the new version of Batman in it, the rebooting requires the returning to the opening menu, aka the moment in time of why Batman exists. And that's enough about that, let's move on. Once the dream is over, the adult Bruce, played by Ben Affleck, is shown landing from a helicopter to the climax of the previous film, being told now from the perspective of the people on the streets as the two last Kryptonians left standing are having their final battle. Bruce and the other humans don't know this, but those of us who saw Man of Steel should know that Zod is trying to kill as many humans as he can while fighting Clark.
I'm going to make them suffer, Cal. These humans you've adopted. I'll take them all from you one by one.
And Clark is trying his best to wear Zod down and stop his rampage on his first day as Superman. Since this was Clark's first day as Superman and he didn't have the same experience as the previous versions of Superman from the comics or the movies, the rookie mistakes he made are front and center in plain view of everyone still in Metropolis, especially Bruce. The most notable damage caused by Clark and Zod's battle is the destruction of a Wayne Enterprises building, which was caused in this scene in Man of Steel and leads to deaths of dozens of people working at the company, leaving this man crippled and maybe all of these children without their parents. That last bit is what leads to Bruce's bitterness towards the very idea of Superman, as we see in this shot of him confronting this orphaned little girl while looking up at the sky as the flying alien men bring down fire from the sky. 18 months later, we are shown the wreckage of Black Zero's second half, aka the other world engine from the spaceship used by Zod's people at the Indian Ocean, where Clark destroyed it in the last movie. Some local divers swim down to the water surrounding the wreckage and surface some of the terraformed rock samples, which they bring to someone I can only assume to be a geologist. The geologist grabs a pickaxe and breaks the rock brought to him in half, opening it to reveal green glowing rock, basically showing us the audience a more believable way how kryptonite exists in the movie, as there wasn't any in the previous one. It didn't follow Kal-El's ship from all the way from Space Sector 2813 to Earth in Space Sector 2814, like in most forms of Superman media, but was instead created on Earth when Black Zero was trying to terraform Earth into Krypton. And even when the attempt was thwarted halfway, it partially succeeded. Props to David Goyer and Chris Terrio for this cause and effect writing between two movies. The following scene is set in a fictional African country of Nairobi, probably named after Nairobi, which is an existing African nation in the real world. Lois Lane, still portrayed by Amy Adams, is there on an international assignment to interview a local warlord by the name of Amayag, a leader of a faction in a local civil war. Lois is joined by a photographer who claims to be Jimmy Olsen, but is in the middle of the interview exposed by one of Amayag's bodyguards, Anatoly Knaizev, played by Callan Mulvey, to be a covert operative from CIA, sent by the agency to accompany Lois while carrying a tracking device in order to locate the warlord in his compound. Since the character is exposed as a NOC, meaning non-official covert operative, I took some time while writing this script to try find any confirmation to the common sense assumption of the CIA does not send their agents on covert ops and tell them to use their real names. The best I was able to find was this paragraph from Knox Wikipedia page, which nods to better suggest that this CIA agent was using the name Jimmy Olsen as an alias, and his real name might as well have been Stan Smith. And I do know that the end credits have this actor credited for having played Jimmy Olsen, but if he is exposed for being a knock, then I'm going to treat him as a knock. Also, as Chris Terrio's previously written movie Argo, which earned him an Academy Award, was about the Iran hostage situation where a CIA agent named Tony Mendez was sent to rescue the hostages. Terrio should know this fact because he wrote Mendez most of the time using his alias of Kevin Harkins when he was doing his job. So, this unnamed CIA agent clears Lois to the warlord for not knowing about the covert op and reveals that she was only used by the agency to make contact with Amajag in trying to propose negotiations with him. The warlord's response is a bullet to the head, which the CIA agent takes like a man not scared of death. His death is acknowledged by the agency, who respond by sending an armed drone to bomb Amajag's desert fortress, regardless of the civilian left to the blast zone. A defiant extraction team races to save Lois from the drone as she is taken prisoner by Amajag indoors of the compound. And while Lois is not present as a witness, Knyzev gives his men a signal to start killing everyone else on the fort before they prepare to leave. In the theatrical version of the movie, this is all they do, while in the full version, Knyzev is shown using a flamethrower to burn bodies of their victims before leaving the compound and moving to a safe distance to watch as Superman arrives to neutralize the missile fired from the drone. Next, from Lois's perspective inside Amajag's fort, Superman arrives to find her held at gunpoint by the warlord. Amajag threatens to shoot Lois, but making eye contact with her, Superman is able to signal her to relax and let him handle the situation by quickly flying and grabbing the warlord as he flies past them. This is what happens in the movie, but it does indeed look as if Superman flew through the walls pushing Amajag as the scene is shown in real time without slow motion from Lois's perspective. However, after this movie came out in 2016, a YouTuber by the name of Christian Disciple, aka Anson Phillips, made loads of different videos talking about it, and one of them was about this scene. In his video, Anson looked this scene up better in slow motion and went through it frame by frame, showing that when Superman flew through the walls, he was carrying Amajag under his body and broke the walls with his own head, meaning that the warlord lived through this and Superman did not accidentally kill him. Next, I need to address the theatrical cuts and the full version's differences in how the Nairobi incident pushes the film's plot forward. In the aftermath of Superman's involvement in Africa, the burned bodies left on the scene by Knyzev and found by the CIA give the impression that Superman killed Amajag's people, but not the warlord. An impression supported by this eyewitness named Kahina Ziri, who we did not see among the survivors, but is giving a statement in a hearing. As I previously said, the theatrical version cut away Knyzev using a flamethrower to burn the men he shot, so the impression given by that version of the movie is that Superman is blamed for shooting the warlord's forces. This is why the film should have been released as a full version and not cut into a shorter version, as neither version mentions the killed being shot with bullets, meaning that the flamethrower caused the bullets in the corpses to melt, probably. And the only bullet located from the scene is this one, lodged on Lois's notebook as the evidence of Superman's innocence. This Capitol hearing, led by Senator Yoon Finch, played by Holly Hunter, gives us the establishment on Superman's autonomy given to him after he asked General Swanwick to talk to Washington in his behalf in Man of Steel. It is no different from the other previous iterations, as we see later in the montage provided by the media voiceover, where he is shown only to interfere with natural disasters and other situations which require help of a rescue worker. That is what Superman's role is in the world, a rescue worker, and not a vigilante like Batman. Whenever he learns of a situation like in Nairobi or anywhere in the world, he goes there to rescue people as a rescue worker. Between Lois's return to the States from Africa, we get to see Batman, or rather the aftermath of Batman's actions in capturing a human trafficker who had kept these traumatized women locked in a cage in an abandoned building. Just like Superman's involvement in Africa being shown from Lois's perspective, Batman is shown from the perspective of these two police officers, and the scene is filmed like it's from a horror movie. I'll talk more about this human trafficker who got branded with a bat symbol later. And after this scene, we see Lois return to her and Clark's shared apartment in Metropolis. Her distress over reliving the Nairobi incident gets put on hold when she discovers the previously mentioned bullet from her notebook, which should be a confusing found because, as far as she knows, no one besides the CIA agent was shot and the rest were burned. While Lois is in the middle of pondering her found, Clark comes home to find her in the middle of taking a bath, where he joins her in a rather unsanitized way without taking off his shoes. Before this happens, however, the exchange in dialogue between them gives the impression that Clark's activities as Superman have given him the attitude where he tries to do his best without caring about what people say about him. And going by what I said about his characterization from my Superman 1978 and Man of Steel comparative review about the reception we gave to his stepping forward, that is a good thing. The fact that he ignores the worst things said about him and just keeps doing his best is what Superman should be doing, rather than try to talk back so his words can be turned against him. But now that attitude has been turned against him. Clark denies killing the burned men at the desert to Lois, and she tells him how the incident now looks to the rest of the world. Lois also brings up her uncertainty about their relationship, where Clark has his double identity. But then they distract each other from the subject by doing what I said they would do earlier. Next, we got to the Batcave with Bruce walking in on Alfred working on his Batman equipment. This scene establishes their working relationship as Alfred's duties seem to also include serving refreshment to his boss. And we see Bruce doing some detective work, with him having managed to torture Anatoly Knyzev's name out of the human trafficker he branded and left to the police to find. And as this is the scene where Knyzev is named, it is also where all three Batman characters in the movie are also established. Just Bruce, Alfred, and Anatoly Knyzev, who in the comics is a Batman villain known as the KG Beast. Bruce, Alfred, and Knyzev are the only Batman characters in this movie, and the rest are either Superman characters or other DC characters. Meaning that from the two superheroes this movie is named after, Superman has more presence in it, and that is another reason why this movie should have been called Man of Steel 2 instead of Batman v Superman. The conversation between Bruce and Alfred reveals that Batman has been after a rumored white Portuguese, who or which is planning to bring a dirty bomb into Gotham according to Bruce, and Knyzev is his latest clue in finding it. Alfred takes this as his chance to comment about how Batman has seemingly begun to brand the criminals he catches with the bat symbol. But Bruce brushes it off by reminding him about vigilante activity being an illegal activity, and that marking those he captured is no different from what he has already been doing. Alfred disagrees and suggests that the first contact made with aliens 18 months ago has caused Bruce to up his game in carrying on his mission as Batman in this new world where being an urban street fighter is not enough anymore. Before we are introduced to the film's antagonist, I'm going to do what I didn't get to do in my comparative review of Superman 1978 and Man of Steel. In 1978, when Richard Donner's Superman movie came out, the character of Lex Luthor was mostly known as a bald mad scientist whose reason to hate Superman was because he caused Luthor to become bald when he was still Superboy. This Silver Age version of Luthor could have allegedly been a good and a noble man if it wasn't for this unfortunate accident of trying to stop a fire in his laboratory, and when using freeze breath to blow out the fire, Superboy caused some chemicals in the lab to fall on young Lex's head and cause him to lose his hair. This caused Luthor to dedicate his life on a petty revenge on Superman, and as far as Silver Age stories go, this was just mildly weird and stupid. When played by Gene Hackman in the 1978 movie, Lex Luthor was presented as the greatest criminal mastermind of our time, who lived in an underground lair with an idiot lackey and I assume Miss Teschmacher was meant to be his girlfriend. Hackman's Luthor was portrayed as a real estate shark instead of a mad scientist, and his plans as such involved causing the US West Coast to fall to the sea by capturing two missiles, so the land he had purchased at a low price would increase in value when they would become beachfront property. And his antagonistic relationship with Superman is best described with the old mafia saying of, it's nothing personal, it's just business. Because of that, Hackman's Luthor just saw Superman as an obstacle to get out of his way, and saw as something that was beneath him. Outside of that, Hackman still portrayed his Luthor to be somewhat cautious and polite to a degree in his interactions with Reeves' Superman, but ultimately the hero-villain dynamic between the two was something that was not thought to go forward very well. Superman 4 The Quest for Peace is an existing proof of this. However, I can see Hackman's portrayal of Lex Luthor as a possible inspiration behind the character's post-Crisis on Infinite Earths reimagining in John Byrne's The Man of Steel comic in 1986. According to Marv Wolfman, John Byrne had once told him this about how he wanted to write Lex Luthor. I never believed in the original Luthor. Every story would begin with him breaking out of prison, finding some giant robot in an old lab he hid somewhere, and then he'd be defeated. My view was that if he could afford those labs and giant robots, he wouldn't need to rob banks. I also thought later that Luthor should not have superpowers. Every other villain had superpowers. Luthor's power was his mind. He needed to be smarter than Superman. Superman's powers had to be useless against him because they couldn't physically fight each other, and Superman was simply not as smart as Luthor. Burns' Luthor makes his first appearance in the fourth issue of The Man of Steel as a mix of Donald Trump and Ted Turner, a corrupt businessman hosting a party on his yacht where Lois and Clark had been invited to. Terrorists seize Luthor's yacht, forcing Clark to change into Superman and intervene. Satisfied at the hero's performance, Luthor attempts to hire him, admitting he knew about the incoming attack and allowed it to occur so he could see how Superman would respond, assuming that Superman would arrive in time. The mayor, upon hearing this, is enraged and then deputizes Superman to arrest Luthor for reckless endangerment. Although Luthor is released from the jail quickly and has the charges dropped, the humiliation of being publicly arrested and processed, coupled with the indignation that Superman refused to work for him or respect his power, results in the villain pledging to destroy Superman simply to prove his power. And we should all agree that that is a much better motivation to hate Superman than causing him to become bald on accident. Several DC writers would eventually, over the next decade, bring back Luthor's scientific prowess and justify them as the means of which he used to found LexCorp, while also writing into his background that he used to be a victim of child abuse by his father. These specific changes were written into the character by Mark Waid in Superman Birthright in 2004 and Jeff Johns in Superman Secret Origin in 2009. And before we continue where we left off in the movie, I'll summarize where this updated Luthor's hatred for Superman came from. For the Birthright Luthor, it came from having waited to make the first contact with aliens his entire life, and when it eventually did happen with Superman, Senpai refused to notice him. In Secret Origin, it was the fact that, as of the most powerful man in Metropolis that he had made himself to be, Superman's presence made him feel like the second most powerful. And we should all know how people feel like being a number two.
Let my dad be number one. And you can still be number two.
Number two? Number two! Nobody calls me that anymore and gets away with it!
Now, as we are introduced to Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of Luthor, keep everything I just said in mind. Eisenberg's Luthor is based by his background strongly on Burns' reimagining as a, well, I'd say more as an entrepreneur than a businessman by his appearance, aka having hair, on the younger version of Lex in Mark Waid's Superman Birthright. He was 33 years old when this movie came out, making his version closer to the same age as Henry Cavill, meaning that Eisenberg's version is not as young as the teenager in Birthright. The DCEU fandom wiki also says that he was born in 1984, so he should be 29 or 30 years old. Also, according to the Yahoo article I managed to dig up from 2013, Zack Snyder's original vision for Lex Luthor before he cast Jesse Eisenberg was to be a mix-up of Richard Branson and Brad Pitt. Eisenberg's Luthor is presented meeting with Senator Finch and her colleague Senator Barrows, who, as established earlier, are in the committee handling Superman's affairs in Washington. He reveals to them that his rebuilding of Metropolis workers have found kryptonite samples from the rubble under where the Otherworld engine was terraforming Metropolis, and shows to them what kind of reaction it has to General Zod's corpse, a cellular degradation. The sample which Luthor's people had managed to find from the Metropolis world engine are just small slivers, but the one found in the Indian Ocean is large enough to be weaponized into, as he puts it, a deterrent or a silver bullet. As a legitimate businessman, Luthor just needs an import license to get it shipped from India to US through legitimate channels, and that is what he needs from the senators. Luthor also justifies such deterrence creation by imploring to his father's, Lex Sr.'s, upbringing in East Germany during the early years of the Cold War, where he had been forced to wave daisies to Soviet tyrants, and that the kryptonite bullet would be to keep the humanity safe from Superman's supposedly fake kindness. Senator Finch takes what information Luthor has provided to them with forward, with a stern and official attitude, while Senator Barrows is shown to be more good natured to be impressed with what Luthor showed experience. Barrows says that they can help each other in some way, and when asked, gives Luthor access to Kryptonian scout ship that crashed into Metropolis and has been under Starlab's custody ever since, as well as Zod's body. Hey, wait a minute! If Luthor has been testing the kryptonite's effects on Zod's body, then shouldn't he already have access to it? This is the first thing that I'm now confused about and find it hard to comprehend. I can explain this Jolly Roger scene as Luthor making Barrows his bitch by making him give him what he wants better than why he would have to ask for access to something he should already have. The next scene is another one that suffered when the theatrical version was cut to be 2 hours and 30 minutes short. In that version, Clark sees a news broadcast reporting how people who got branded by the bat symbol have been killed in prisons. But in the 3-hour version, it shows an interview of Kahina Ziri, the supposed eyewitness from the Nairobi incident, who criticizes Superman's actions and questions how he decides who to save and who not to. So, in the theatrical version, this was meant to be Superman's sole reason for growing antagonistic towards Batman, while the 3-hour version has it be the moment where Clark begins to question if his actions as Superman do have a positive effect. An example of the negative effect is shown in the next scene as the Wayne Enterprises worker who lost his legs during the Black Zero event, named Wally Skeef, goes to pay his respects to those who died 18 months ago on the memorial monument with the names of the fallen written on 9 erected stone tablets and a statue of Superman kneeling before them. Keith then climbs up the statue and spray paints False God where Superman's S-shield is, and is arrested by the police for vandalism, resisting arrest, and felony of making terrorist threats. By the way, I cannot confirm this, but there are rumors that Keith was apparently supposed to be Metallo in the earlier versions of the film before Chris Terrio came to rewrite the script into the final version we got. There is some evidence to this in the end credits where this scientist with Luthor is credited to have been playing Emmett Vale, Metallo's creator in the comics. Keith's arrest is publicized on television and seen by Clark and the Daily Planet staff on the news. Returning to characters from the previous movie in this scene include Lawrence Fishburne's Perry White, who orders Jenny Jurvik, played by Rebecca Buller, to write an article on Keith's arrest. Clark is also assigned to go to Gotham to do a sports article about a football match that ended up with Gotham's team losing. Clark going to Gotham is another important scene that was cut away from the theatrical version, as firstly it serves as an establishing shot showing that Gotham and Metropolis are neighboring cities separated by a bay you can cross via a ferry ride. Here is a comic book panel from the Silver Age to show how. The second reason is that seeing Kahina Ziri's interview and Wally Skeef's arrest have made Clark decide to go meet and talk to Ziri about the Nairobi incident, but she is not home in her Gotham apartment. Ziri's neighbors claim that she has not been home for quite some time, with a blind man says she ran away from something Clark should also flee from, while this single mother rebuts that Clark is not one of those people who should be afraid of him. And this is the third reason why Clark's trip to Gotham was important, because it is here where he organically learns about Batman's existence and
There's a new kind of mean in him.
from resident Gothamites and not from a random news report alone. Speaking of Batman, the next scene has him as Bruce Wayne at an underground fight club betting on a match between two fighters while shadowing Anatoly Knaizev. We get to see an aspect of Bruce's strategic fighting knowledge when the fighter he is betting on gets knocked at him, and while helping the fighter back into the ring, he whispers some fighting tips to the guy, which leads to a victory and Knaizev losing money. Afterwards, under the guise of collecting his winnings, Bruce manages to stay close enough to Knaizev to bluejack the Russian's phone. My only problem about this is that Bruce is at the fight club using his public real name and not disguised in his third identity as Matches Malone. The next scene jumps to Daily Planet's staff meeting, where Clark tries to report his findings about Batman from his visit to Gotham, where he didn't get any work done on the football assignment Perry gave him. Perry makes a comment about today's media needing to choose writing interesting stories instead of possibly important ones to Clark, before Lois comes to the meeting late to tell about the bullet she discovered from her notebook. Again, as this is the only bullet recovered from the Nairobi incident, it is a crucial part of evidence proving that Superman did not kill anyone there, and its mystery aspect is thickened even more as Lois has not been able to trace its manufacturer. And even without the Superman angle, the story that could be written on the bullet might expose the US military as lying hypocrites supporting African rebels while claiming to stand with elected government. Perry grants Lois his permission to investigate the issue in Washington. As Lois is shown prepared to leave, Clark confronts her about the bullet and not telling him about it, with her telling him that she didn't tell him because she knew he would react in this overprotective way. Watching her walk away, Perry gives Clark another assignment to cover a gala that night at the Metropolis Library, telling him that someone in the committee had requested for him. The following scene shows Senator Finch coming to meet Luthor, and if you are unbiased in not having decided to hate this movie, you should be able to recognize that Jesse Eisenberg's performance as Lex Luthor in this scene begins with his character trying to brown nose his way to please her while also trying to appeal to Finch's compassion by talking about his dead father. When these attempts are revealed to go nowhere, as Finch reveals that she has blocked the import license on the larger chunk of kryptonite found in the Indian Ocean, Luthor's facade cracks. He takes a second or two to compose his anger, and then tries to sound as non-threatening as possible while getting into her personal space. Finch is presented in this interaction as a much stronger-willed character than Barrows earlier, and tells Luthor with some interestingly chosen words that she won't be made into Luthor's bitch like her colleague was.
Take a bucket of piss and call it Granny's peach tea. Take a weapon of assassination and call it deterrence. You won't fool a fly or me.
Luthor grabs the final word in their meeting by first indirectly threatening to kill her, but then breaks the tension by pointing Finch's attention to a painting showing a war between angels and demons. The next scene is a dream sequence, and for the sake of summarizing it, I need to remind you all that dream sequences in storytelling are used to showcase the dreamer's mental state, in this case, Bruce Wayne's mental state. In the dream, Bruce is shown visiting his family crypt, which has a mural glass window showing an angel dressed in red and blue, to place flowers next to his mother's tomb. Martha Wayne's tombstone then begins to leak blood all of a sudden, and then a monstrous bat creature bursts out from her grave and attacks Bruce, which causes him to wake up. Now think about what I just said. Dream sequences in storytelling are used to showcase the mental state of the dreamer. How do you explain Bruce's mental state based on this dream? Feel free to pause the video and think about it if you want, and write down into the comments. I will give my own interpretation when we get to that point of the movie where it's best talked about. Having woken up, we see Bruce's lifestyle outside of being Batman and the CEO of his family's company circling around drug abuse, alcohol, and casual sex while living in a lake house instead of the Wayne Manor. I assume this woman in his bed is some random woman he picked up from that fight club or some other place he went from there. Or maybe she's a high-class escort. Due to Bruce's double life, I am not 100% sure how his sleeping schedule goes. So this breakfast he's having with Alfred could be based on the lighting outside taking place at noon or sometime later afternoon. It's straight to business as Bruce tells Alfred that Knisev's blue-jacked phone has made calls mentioning the white Portuguese that Batman has been hunting while also sending encrypted data to Lex Luthor's home. After some dialogue exchange, Alfred reveals that Bruce has been invited as a guest to a cocktail party held in Lex Luthor's house. This invitation also reveals that the movie is taking place in November, which explains the weather and damp exterior lighting in most scenes taking place outside during the daytime. What follows next is a scene of Bruce looking at his Batman costume, likely weighing his options in which of his identities he should go infiltrate Luthor's home. He then decides against going as Batman by turning and walking away from the costume while also stopping to look at the red and black costume with a taunting message written on it with yellow spray paint. This is obviously a Robin costume that belonged to a boy wonder who got killed by the Joker. Just wait, I'll get to it. Before Bruce leaves to that party, we get this weird scene of a fully naked Ben Affleck in the shower. I say it's weird, mostly due to its length, and if it's meant to be a reference to those comic book panels showing Batman's scars on his upper body, it doesn't really work as I can't see any old wounds on his body. Then Bruce is shown leaving for Luthor's party, driving Zack Snyder's personally owned Aston Martin past what looks like a burned Wayne Manor and... Okay, again, before I continue going through the film's plot, I think we have seen enough of Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne for me to tell which two comic book versions of Batman he is based on. Yes, two versions, not just one. The first obvious version is Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns version, which was confirmed back in 2013 by having Harry Lennox read the quote from the comic, as well as the design of Ben Affleck's Batman costume. The other version on which the character is also based on is, in my opinion, the mainstream DC Universe version from the late 1980s as written by Jim Starlin and Marv Wolfman. The reason why I see Starlin and Wolfman's version influencing Affleck's Batman along with Miller's The Dark Knight Returns version, and I mean just that version from that story, these other addendums written by Miller can be thrown into the trash, comes from the fact that Affleck's character is shown to be at the same point of his life/career as Batman where these other versions also were, after they had all lost the closest thing they had to a son. Also, there's the fact that Affleck's character is 11 years younger than the character in Miller's book. This point of Batman's life/career is also something that has not been explored outside of comics quite much, and that timeline is pretty easy to deduce, especially when Batman's life can be mapped out by using Robins as linchpins. The Nolan and Burton films had Christian Bale and Michael Keaton's version mostly set in Batman's earlier years in the pre-Dick Grayson's Robin era, while the Schumacher movies, along with Adam West's show and Batman the Animated Series, were set during Dick Grayson's tenure as Robin. Then there's Gotham, which was a prequel set before Batman became a thing in Bruce Wayne's life. The closest we have ever gotten to the point where we see Ben Affleck's version is in the new Batman Adventures cartoon, which was set in the era where Dick Grayson had become Nightwing and Tim Drake was the new Robin, and that recently published tie-in comic had Jason Todd retconned between them. Now, I can understand that being introduced to a Batman who is in his mid-40s makes you confused how he got into this point of his career. Many people have criticized the movie for not following Man of Steel with a solo Batman movie before this film, But from my point of view, this is like how I was first introduced to Dragon Ball Z, a quarter way into the Namek saga, in that episode where Goku left the hospital and went to get a spaceship from Bulma's dad, so he can follow Bulma, Gohan, and Krillin to Namek. That was me on the 4th grade back in 2002, when we didn't have streaming services that could allow me to watch previous episodes to understand what was going on. It was one episode per day from Monday to Friday, and if I missed an episode, there were no reruns. I had no idea what made Goku such a big deal, or why his 5-year-old son had gone to another planet with his friends, or how he was friends with Bulma and Krillin, or why they were on Namek looking for the Dragon Balls, or who these guys were, or who Vegeta was, and what his deal was, or why he kept referring to Goku as
Kakarot has surpassed the normal limitations of a Saiyan warrior, but
and all of those questions were answered eventually as I kept watching the show. Meaning, if my 10-year-old self was able to watch and learn those answers on a show I had no previous knowledge of, without going back to watch previous episodes or finding episode information from Wikipedia, which was still too new for general usage back in 2002, then grown-ups who know who Batman is should be able to piece together how Ben Affleck's Batman is designed based on what is shown in the movie. Okay, and now let's continue where we left off. Bruce arrives to Luthor's party and is welcomed by a bunch of paparazzis, with Clark standing among them. Clark is unfamiliar with Bruce Wayne as a celebrity, which is explained by this photographer's assumption on him being new to the Let Them Eat Cake beat. It was likely due to the then CBS, now CW, Supergirl TV show why this movie was not allowed to have Cat Grant, Daily Planet's infamous gossip news journalist, to accompany Clark to this event or be sent there instead of him. This woman, named by the movie subtitles as LeBlanc, introduces Luthor as the man of the hour, and Luthor then delivers an acceptance speech on being honored. Jesse Eisenberg's performance in this scene is something that many naysayers tend to use in pointing out why he is miscast in the role, and if this was a different scene with different circumstances, I would agree. However, just like his interactions with Senators Barrows and Finch, this can be seen with unbiased lenses as another public persona Luthor uses as a show to hide his true nature, in a similar way how Clark Kent wears glasses. Meaning, if this performance makes you feel like Jesse Eisenberg is miscast into the role, then Luthor's facade is working, and we can also see it crack briefly, revealing his truer nature as his speech makes a reference to his hatred against Superman.
Bittersweet pain among men is having knowledge with no power, because that is paradoxical.
In the middle of Luthor's speech, Bruce separates from the crowd and contacts Alfred about his true purpose in Luthor's house. Clark superhearing picks up their conversation, which causes him to see what Bruce is doing and follow him. Also, I will talk about the superhearing when we get to that scene where he could have used it later. Alfred, working from the Batcave on the Batcomputer, leads Bruce down to the server room, where Bruce manages to install a drive to download what Luthor has on his computers. He is caught in there by Luthor's assistant, but manages to play his own public facade of a millionaire playboy who got lost looking for the bathroom while intoxicated to throw her off. Either that, or as we learn later in the film, she knew that her boss wanted him to be there as a part of his plan. The download takes some time, which Bruce can't spend loitering in the server room, so Alfred sarcastically suggests him to go back upstairs to find his next female conquest. Bruce gets back upstairs just in time for Luthor's speech to end, and tries to hit on this woman in a wine-red dress, but is stopped by Clark, who after hearing his communications with Alfred, and probably heard from the paparazzi earlier that Bruce is from Gotham, starts to ask him questions about Batman under his guise as a reporter. Bruce does his best to dodge the question, but Clark keeps shooting him with questions, likely to pressure on who he suspects of being Batman.
Don't believe everything you hear, son.
The confirmed age difference between these two men is less than a decade, which makes this line stupid, even when it's Bruce trying to act on his aging playboy role. After Clark brings up what he learned about Batman on his trip to Gotham and says that Batman thinks he's above the law, Bruce deflects by calling Clark and Daily Planet to be hypocrites, by pointing out Superman's autonomy and glorification on whatever he does while his powers could be used to do to Earth what Frieza did to Namek in less than 5 minutes. When Clark points out that view of Superman not being that popular, Bruce then makes an obscure reference to the Joker in comparing him to Superman.
Maybe it's the Gotham City in me. We just have a bad history with freaks dressed like clowns.
Which leads to a few seconds of awkward silence broken eventually by Luthor. Jesse Eisenberg continues to portray the character in his public facade, and most of what he says is basically just foreshadowing to what happens later in the movie. And I can concur that without context, this scene does come across somewhat cringy, especially since it was used in that second trailer they released before the movie came out. That trailer which Zack Snyder was not pleased with as it revealed too many plot points at the end of the third act. Another minus on it is that it's mostly Bruce and Luthor who talk back and forth here, while Clark's dialogue is left minimal or non-existent. Anyway, at the same time the download is complete down in the server room, Luthor is called away by his assistant, and Clark once again hears Alfred's communications with Bruce. They separate as Bruce returns downstairs. This time Clark is following him, but is then distracted by the news showing a burning building in New Orleans, and is forced to go rescue the people still inside as Superman. Bruce reaches the server room only to find that the drive he left is gone, before catching a glimpse of the woman in wine-red dress he was planning to court earlier, looking right back at him before walking away. Bruce chases after her on the strongest suspicion that she took his drive, but she is able to leave the party before Bruce catches up with her. And I do know who she is. We all do. But for the sake of revelations in the film's narrative, I'm going to ignore who Gal Gadot is playing here for now. You'll learn why when I get to it. Clark is next shown rescuing a youngish, probably a teenaged girl from a burning building in New Orleans as Superman, and carries the survivor to her family. I am not very well versed on the local American holidays, but I suppose these people were celebrating the Day of the Dead, and that is why some of them have face paint. Anyway, as Clark kneels down to place this girl he rescued into her mother's arms, the crowd begins to reach out and touch him as if he was a
Jesus character,
which makes Clark visibly feel uncomfortable. Following this, we are shown that news footage montage I mentioned we'd get earlier, showing Clark as Superman saving sailors whose ship got struck on the Arctic, astronauts in a failed space launch, and the people in this flooded town. All the while being given different commentaries on his actions are seen by different experts, along with Senator Finch being interviewed about Superman's autonomy. Most of them are just focused on Superman as a powerful alien living among us, and I could only separate this man, Vikram Gandhi, to be the only one being positive as he refers to Superman as
maybe he's just a guy trying to do the right thing.
Because that is exactly how Clark is portrayed in the film. On the two occasions we have seen Superman in the film, outside of the opening flashback from Bruce's point of view, Clark has been using his powers to help people and not force his powers on anyone by being a vigilante like Batman. He has been acting, as I said before, as a rescue worker. He rescued Lois from Amajang in Nairobi, and now we saw him rescue this girl in New Orleans, these sailors in the Arctic, astronauts in this shuttle, and arriving to help these people in the flooded town. Clark has unselfishly been doing a thankless job by being Superman, which he was okay with as he said earlier. But now the pressure has started to get to him as more and more people have begun to voice their negative opinions about him, while the small minority appreciating him might as well ignore his help. Watching these people talk about him on television makes Clark likely think back to what his father told him when he was a teenager and saved his classmates from drowning.
When the world finds out what you can do, it's going to change everything.
Speaking of that point in Man of Steel, imagine if the teenaged Clark was going through what his adult self is going through. Do you think he would have been able to deal with it as mildly then as he is now? Conflicted about his situation, Clark goes to his mother, played again by Diane Lane, but probably having so much to ask for is unable to find the right words. He only ends up asking,
How come Dad never left Kansas?
which is not answered by a negative comment like, you left him die in a tornado, as some toxic jerk trying to be edgy would say. Clark is asking how come Pa Kent never left Kansas to see more of the world during the time he was still alive. According to his gravestone in Man of Steel, he was 46 when he died and never left to travel the world outside of Kansas before or when he was the same age as Clark is now. Ma Kent gives her son the same simple answer that her husband gave to her when she asked.
You know how he was. What do I need to travel for? I'm already there.
Clark's situation outside of his hometown is, however, not as simple. Meanwhile, or on the following day, Lois has arrived to what I assume to be a forensics lab in Washington. That's where she was leaving for when we last saw her. And has given the bullet she found in Nairobi to be investigated by this forensics woman identified by the subtitles as Janet Clyburn. She is played by Jenna Malone, and this is also one important scene in the movie that was cut in the theatrical release. Clyburn is unable to recognize the metal in which the bullet was made from, and so it is deduced that whoever made it must have been trying to field test it on live soldiers. Clark has on his end gone to put what he saw on television behind himself and is now reading on news reports on how Batman has recently begun to brand criminals he leaves for the police to find with the bat symbol. For some reason, these brandings have been causing these criminals to get treated violently or even deadly while in prison holding, which I cannot understand how. The fact that these people have physical evidence about their encounter with Batman should gain them respect among the convict population if they play their cards right and tell tall tales about how the brands are like battle wounds when they fought Batman, or earned them as badges of honor for managing to get a good chance to punch Batman and live to tell the tale. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and we see the human trafficker from Batman's first scene, named Cesar Santos by the subtitles, being dragged through the prison holdings and being transferred to the general prison population, which he vocally protests against, fearing for his safety.
Sign in, please. Mark, man, you know what to do to people with this on them? He's on you.
At the same holding area, Wally Skeef is released on bail, which is revealed to have been paid for by Luthor, who waits to meet Keith at his home. And here we get the only F-bomb in this R-rated extended edition.
What the fuck do you want?
Following this, I am not sure how these following events are supposed to lead on. Luthor gives Keith an electric wheelchair and a nice suit so he can go meet with Senator Finch and demand her to get Superman to appear in her next court hearing. Keith appeals to Finch on his current situation being Superman's fault and begs to be able to face the Man of Steel. The time between Luthor's first meeting with Keith and Keith meeting with Finch cannot be something that just happened on the same day. And until now, the movie has been almost randomly jumping between scenes. I say almost randomly because I have been able to recognize some patterns between their transitions being done chronologically and being related to something similar happening at the time. So, if chronological real-time scenes taking place on the same day have been shown before now, what are the other characters doing during the time before Keith goes to meet up with Finch? I can see that my previous question about how the bat-branded criminals are getting killed while in prison instead of being respected or gotten recognized. Knyzev has been telling his men implanted in the prison to kill them to make the Bat brand appear to be a death sentence. Cesar Santos gets shivved by this big guy after Knyzev tells him to do it. And that is 1 hour of the film covered. I'll pick this up again in part 3. Until that video comes out, remember to click the like button, comment your thoughts down below, and share this video to others you deem interested. Subscribe to the channel, ding the bell to be notified when part 3 comes out, and may your heart be your guiding key.